the collection of knowledge that people, especially in the real estate investing space, that people are willing to share with you makes all the difference. Any success that I have had in our real estate investing, from single family homes to some flips to multifamily, Airbnb, and then self-storage, it all comes from the opportunity to learn from other people's mistakes and people being willing to share their condensed life experience.
Welcome to the Real Estate Mogul MD podcast. Thanks for tuning in and taking control of your financial future. This is a show where we not only motivate and inspire, we give you actionable real-world experience to help you live life by design. You'll hear journeys and stories from other physicians, investors, coaches, consultants, and entrepreneurs. And now, here's your host, Brett Riggins. Before today's guest began a successful career in real estate investing, he spent 16 years in medical sales, developing long-term relationships with doctors, medical staff, and patients. His real estate career started off single family, like so many people. And he then started converting these quadplexes in Wilmington, North Carolina to short-term rentals. And now I'm excited to jump into this conversation with today's guest and talk about the new cycle they've created in the industrial world, the storage world, how they're working with their investors to create not an exit, but just to build this true freedom, time freedom, location freedom, true freedom in their lives with truly passive income. He's now with a company called Nomad Capital. Everybody, please welcome Clint Harris to the show. All right, Mr. Clint Harris, welcome to the show. How are you doing today, man? How's the rain? Is it raining?
So wind so far, but the rain is on the way. If it hit you, then that means it's not far away from hitting me. So you're my canary in the coal mine today. Thanks
so we are for the listeners, we are both in the Carolinas here. You're closer to the coast. And we are recording this in the beginning of January in 24, which is winter here. And it is a monsoon outside here. So you are trapped out on a little island, right? They've shut the bridge down. So you're hunkered down in the basement. Hopefully we can get the recording together. But more importantly, thank you for the time that you're providing us and our listeners to share some of your experience. You are not a physician, but you are still close to the medicine practitioner, if that is the words lined up that make sense. I'm just putting them together. But anyway, you're close to medical professionals, being in the medical sales world, but now you've ventured into real estate, and I want to learn more about you and your journey here. So hopefully we can bring some value to the listeners. Tell us a little bit about where you started in medicine.
Sure. And appreciate the invitation. Happy to be here today. So, my name is Clint Harris. Now I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina. I started my career. I had a 16-year career in medical sales, implanting pacemakers and defibrillators. Started working in Columbia, South Carolina, which is close to where I'm from. And so implanting pacemakers and defibrillators, days were usually a combination of implants in the EP lab, working with electrophysiologists, cardiologists, surgeons, and then clinic days, having patients come in through the ER that had got shocked by their defibrillator or having issues with a pacemaker or AFib burden, or days at the cardiologist's office, just going through clinics, seeing one patient after the other and troubleshooting. So I was kind of in that space. A lot of my community and my friends are physicians or white coat professionals. I spent 11 years in Columbia, South Carolina, transitioned and took a promotion to Wilmington, North Carolina in 2017 and took over the territory there. The whole time that I was in the profession, I started in my early 20s. I was, I think, 23 when I started. It's kind of a young man's game. A lot of times, much like a lot of the physician listeners that you have, it can be a grind. It's a lot. Nights, weekends, taking call, and everything that goes along with that. I didn't have it nearly as bad as a lot of the physicians out there, especially some of the ones that are practicing defensive medicine and just dealing with the administrative side. But it's a lot, right? It's kind of a young man's game. And I saw pretty early on that at some point I needed to build an off-ramp. I loved what I did, and I was lucky enough to be pretty good at it. But, you don't wait until the day it starts raining to build Noah's Ark, right? That's something you want to plan ahead for. So I started investing in single family homes when I was in Columbia, South Carolina. My girlfriend and then fiance and now wife, We ended up buying 9 single family properties. We did the Burr strategy, which you may have heard of on several of them. And my journey through single family homes taught me that it's very, very slow, and it's not very scalable, and it was not going to get me where I wanted to be in a timely manner. So when we transitioned and I took a promotion to Wilmington, North Carolina, it put me in a market where short-term rentals were a thing, meaning Airbnb properties. It was more of a vacation location at the beach. And so we started we started buying small multifamily property. We bought a duplex and then a quadplex, then another quadplex, then another quadplex. And we were buying small multifamily properties with bad long-term tenants in place that hadn't had a rent increase in years and years, chain smokers, rough properties. And we're doing this on the side. My wife was in medical sales. She transitioned out to just help us with our full-time real estate investing. So we're buying these properties, moving out the month-to-month tenants, doing full renovations, converting them to top-performing Airbnb properties. We got really good at that and essentially replaced my income with that through those 14 short-term listings. However, it was pretty labor-intensive, and we spent a lot of time focusing on trying to achieve a level of cash flow that would equal financial freedom. The problem is when we got there, what it didn't equal is time or location independence. So the lesson for us was that financial independence by itself can be fairly shallow, when what you're really looking for is financial time and location independence, because those things combined kind of give you an independence of purpose where you can choose what you want to do or where you want to go. Whereas if you hit the financial goals, but then you're stuck in one location, especially during the summertime and you're dealing with messaging and cleaning and everything else, we kind of built that portfolio and then realized the folly of our ways. So in the effort of trying to find a property management company that could take over those listings, we couldn't find anybody that was any good. And so we partnered with some other local investors and we started a property management company. Took about 18 to 24 months to build that out. It was exhausting. I wouldn't recommend it for anybody. But now that's a property management company that I basically hired myself out of. I'm a silent partner. I have a meeting about once a month on it. It manages my listings and then about 85 more. And that's what we had to do to get that to a point where it's quote unquote passive, right? And the reality is it's not passive, it's residual. We just front loaded all the work over a period of a couple years. During this whole period of time, I was still in medical sales, selling pacemakers and defibrillators, just working evenings and weekends, kind of building up this company with my wife and my partners. What really made a meaningful difference and what eventually retired me out of the medical industry was in 2020, a couple years before I got out of the medical industry, I started looking around at different strategies and the economies of scale and the ability to hit the financial goals and the time and location goals that I had set for myself and for my family. Small multifamily properties was not going to get there. Airbnb properties, it's a great investment strategy. There's a lot of forced appreciation. It was not going to give me the time, location, and financial independence combination that I was looking for. So I decided to ask around and look at the older, smartest investors that I could find. Like if you look around, the smart old guys that have been doing real estate investing for a long time, that all have plenty of money and look like they're sitting around doing nothing, I wanted to know what they were doing. So in the pursuit of that and going to local real estate meetups and talking to those people, it ultimately came down to 3 things. And it was typically hard money lending or note lending money to people that were flipping houses. It was mobile home parks, and it was self-storage. I didn't have any money to lend to anybody, not in a meaningful way. I had no interest in mobile home parks, and that led me to self-storage. So through the local real estate meetups, I met my partners that are now my partners in the company that I'm working with. But in 2020, we bought an old Kmart building in North Carolina for pennies on the dollar compared to the replacement cost. If you think about, at one point in time, there was 1,200 Kmarts in the country. There's none left. But there's very little appetite for big box retail space, but it's typically in a great location. So in 2020, we bought a Kmart. We bought it for 1.5 million. We put about 2.5 into it. We're into it for about 4 million, and the stabilized asset is worth north of 9 million. Once you convert that to just a giant Class A climate controlled self-storage facility. We did that as a joint venture. And that was the project that really changed things for us in a meaningful way, that I got invited to join my partners in the formation of Nomad Capital, their company. And then last year, we bought 2 Kmart's, 3 warehouses, and a grocery store that we converted to Class A self-storage. In November of 2022, I left medical sales behind and am living the life of full-time real estate investor with an emphasis on self-storage, buying big box retail and converting it to Class A self-storage.
Wow, wow. And what I've loved is I've seen some of these Kmart conversions happening. It's just very interesting to repurpose the structures like that. And I did notice on the Nomad Capital website, which is nomadcapital.us, and on there is interesting on the strategy section, the what we do. The 4 different types, right? The existing self-storage, the conversion self-storage, which would be that Kmart thing, the mismanaged self-storage, and the development self-storage, the new build stuff. So lots of stuff happening there. Finding that team around you has got to be one of the biggest pieces of maybe the inflection point, like getting yourself surrounded by the right people. And it started back in your, when you planted that seed in your mind of, hey, where do I want to be? Who is already doing what I want to do? I want to talk with them and learn from them. So that was a great first step. But then implementing and taking action is another piece. In my mind, in listening to that, I want to know, like, you talk about front loading and then residual from that front loading, right? And I'm thinking this is probably a similar path for you in this inflection point than what you've gotten here with Nomad, because you've put so many years into building your knowledge, your appetite, experience, in which now enabled you to bring that value to this partnership to create that inflection for you. Would you agree with that?
I would, but I don't think it's on my merit. I think that, as a professional in medical sales, I had a lot of windshield time and a lot of driving. And one of the reasons that I jumped at the chance to be on your podcast, and one of the reasons I try to do as many podcasts as I can, one of the reasons I host a podcast is because the collection of knowledge that people, especially in the real estate investing space, that people are willing to share with you makes all the difference. Any success that I have had in our real estate investing, from single family homes to some flips to multifamily, Airbnb, and then self-storage, it all comes from the opportunity to learn from other people's mistakes and people being willing to share their condensed life experience. So, as a lot of time behind the wheel, a lot of time, windshield time, I was listening to podcasts, trying to educate myself and kind of grow from there, and then take what I've heard other people do and what they've accomplished, and then try to extrapolate that as to, okay, what do I want my life to look like? How do we work backwards to where I am now? And what changes do we need to make in a meaningful way to get there? And it's not that it always has told me what to do, but more than anything, it's often told me that the strategy that I'm currently pursuing is not going to get me there. And if whatever you're doing in life, even as a successful medical sales rep, like if you know the ceiling of where you are, you can calculate the amount of money that you're making, the amount of vacation days you get, the amount of time that you get with your family, the amount of travel you get to do. If you know what that ceiling is, then it's up for you to decide if that is enough for you and your family and the life that you're trying to create. And if it's not, then the only real risk you have is not doing something. Right. So if you stay where you are, you pretty much know where you're going to land and where you're going to end up. And if that fits with the mold of what you want for your life, then you nailed it. Congratulations. You're right where you want to be. If you decide that it's not, then the only real risk is not making some kind of change. And for me, a meaningful change usually comes by way of the places I go, the books I read, or the people I meet. Right. It's outside influence. And so the outside influence is what led me to the different investing meetups that I've had, the conversations that I've had, the phone calls and the cold calls. That's the beauty of real estate, is when you're trying to connect with other people, people in that world tend to love to talk about those things. You already have something in common, right? There's common ground there already. And so it was an easy conversation to have. And the other thing is that there's a lot of parallels in the space. And the asset class conversion, I was taking small, nasty quadplexes with bad tenants in place that were long-term tenants. I was converting that to a different asset class, fixing it up and having some forced appreciation by doing renovation, but then converting it to another asset class of a short-term rental, 3 to 4X's the gross monthly rental potential. It's the same thing. You take an old Kmart that at one point was probably the largest employer in that community with great residential density in a 1, 3, 5, and 7 mile radius, great traffic count, great visibility. There's very little appetite for big box retail, but everybody knows where that building is. It's just sitting there. You take that one building and you break it up into 600 or 700 units. Really, all you're doing is renting someone a box of air. There's nothing inherently special about self-storage. You're just breaking it up into multiple units. What is special about it is that if you and I wanted to go build self-storage right now, we're going to spend $120 a square foot for the construction plus the cost of the land. With conversions, our last 6 projects that we did, when you buy the land and you do the conversion and we are cutting the ribbon, opening up the doors, renting out units, we're average $63.50 a square foot because that first Kmart that we bought for $1.5 million, the replacement cost to build the brick and mortar shell is $6.5. It's the same way that if someone tries to flip a house, you don't make your money when you sell the house. You don't make your money when you renovated the house. You made the money when it smelled like dogs and cats and you bought it for dirt cheap. It's the same kind of concept. So it's not rocket science, and it's certainly not something I came up with. What you said before is imperative. It's the team. My partners are general contractors with 30 years of experience. So we find the buildings ourselves. We raise the capital in-house. We do the construction in-house. We do the management in-house. It would be really hard for somebody else to just go tackle this. But because we have that vertical integration of being able to do everything in-house at a very manageable cost, we're positioned pretty well. And what that means is when we take an old big box retail building and we convert it, when we're opening up the doors as a self-storage facility, we're usually sitting around 30 to 35% loan to value, which means unlike a flip, when you fix it up, you make it a little bit nicer, you've got to sell it to get your money out. When we're at 30 to 35% loan to value, we can fill the property up and stabilize it. Then we can typically refinance it to 50, 55, maybe 60% loan to value. We can double our investors' money, pull a few $1 million out for us as well, which is tax-free because it's a non-capital event. It's a refinance. We never sold anything. So it's not a capital event. Then we can keep the asset and allow it to continue to cash flow for our investors and ourselves. It gives that economies of scale. So in this day and age, it's all about the people you are working with. It's about the team that you have, creative strategies, and asset class conversion. In my opinion, the market's too tight and the interest rates are too high to do the same thing as everybody else. You have to do something a little bit different.
Say that again.
I just said that the market is too tight and the interest rates are too high to be able to go out and do the same thing that everybody else is doing and create margin. You have to have some kind of creative strategy. You have to buy it as one thing and convert it to a different asset class that has a different formula by which the asset is valued to create massive natural and forced appreciation. If you do that, you can put yourself in a position where you can recapitalize without selling the asset. I don't care if it's a 100-unit apartment complex or a single-family home. If every time you buy something, you fix it up and you have to sell it to get your money out, now you're just a house flipper and you're trading time for money. I would bet you most of your white coat professionals that are listening to this are probably listening because they're tired of trading time for money. And if you are trading time for money and you're selling a project, then ultimately the day you stop working is the day you stop getting paid. The idea is to build up a portfolio of properties where you can cash flow, you can pull money out of the projects if you created enough value that will allow you to continue to go on and move to the next one and continue to scale. But you want to keep the assets and allow them to continue to cash flow. It goes back to what we talked about everybody's after financial independence. The reality is financial time and location independence should be the goal because those create an independence of purpose. And that's why my partners named our syndication Nomad Capital, because a nomad in our mind is somebody that can go where they want, when they want, and do what they want. You don't get there by selling assets. Sure, you're probably going to have to sell some along the way, but the idea is building up a portfolio of assets where you can build enough value that you could refinance or recapitalize, make sure your investors get a strong payday, make sure you got money to keep the lights on, and continue to scale moving forward. So otherwise, you're just buying and selling.
So when your exit, you probably syndicate these deals on these exits where you do refi and you have those multipliers for your investors. Does your do you buy your investors out at that point in order to give them their multiple back?
I'm really glad you asked that question. No, we don't, and a lot of people will.
So that's a big difference.
It's a major difference.
Big difference. And now you are practicing what you preach and allowing your investors to eat from the same candy bowl.
We're trying to build a tribe of real estate nomads. We don't get that way by selling assets. We don't get that way by pushing our investors out. We had a 2-year goal of trying to hit $100 million in stabilized assets under management. We've been doing this about 2.5 years now. As syndication, my partners have been doing self-storage since 2006, but we beat that goal by a couple of weeks. So we're over 100 million in assets, stabilized assets under management now. We got a 5-year goal of 500 million and a 10-year goal of $1 billion. And the way that we get there is we pay our investors first. We're open, honest, and ethical about what we're doing. We're transparent with the messaging, and we just make sure that we're not pushing people out. We want to put ourselves in a position where we give people strong short-term returns, but we allow our investors to stay in for the long term and continue to own their same percentage of equity moving forward. So how can we do that? The only way we can do that, if we're paying retail costs for the building, retail costs for the construction, retail costs for the private or the hard money, and retail costs for the property management, there's no way. There's not enough margin there. But it's also the reason why we have an advantage. A lot of the buildings, we have an acquisition team that's looking at 50 to 70 properties a week. Some of them are on market, a lot of them are off market, but we're finding our own deals. We're raising capital from a group of investors. Then we do the construction in-house. We are typically building out at cost plus 12%, which is significantly less than commercial construction. And then we do the property management in-house at 5%. If we were buying an apartment complex, let's say we were putting granite countertops in and stainless steel, and we're going to increase the value by 30 to 35%. That's not enough value to do much with besides liquidate the asset and everybody gets a payday, which is great, but you got to put that money back to work. It doesn't do anything for you in the long run. The only reason this strategy works, and it's why we're specifically out of the 4 strategies you mentioned, we lean very heavy into the conversion space. The conversions create enough value where we can typically buy a property for a couple million, put a couple million into it. When the building's done, it's going to be worth $9-10 million. As a stabilized property that's full as a self-storage facility, it's worth probably 13 to 17 million, depending on the average rates for the market and the size of the facility. At that point, we're usually 30 to 35% loan to value. So when we refi, we don't want to refi it all the way to the hilt. We're not going to go to 75 or 80% loan to value because we don't want to stress the asset, right? This is a golden goose. Nobody wants to kill and eat the goose. We'd rather live off the eggs. So we want to refinance the property at 55, 60% loan to value. That way, everybody's going to get a return of capital plus a nice payday, which coming by way of refinance is a non-capital event. And at that point in time, we allow all of our investors to stay in the deal with the same equity that they originally had, continues to cash flow moving forward because we didn't stress that asset. And then as long as we own the property, it continues to cash flow. And then usually there's a larger event on the end. Like we're working in a fund model. So instead of investing, last year we did 6 individual deals. This year we're doing a fund. So instead of investing into an individual deal, you're investing into a fund that might have 5 or 6 self-storage facilities in it. So you own a portion of that portfolio. It's kind of the difference in like betting on an individual racehorse in a race versus betting on the jockey that may ride 5 or 6 horses in 5 or 6 different races. So it gives you some diversification in terms of different assets, different geography, different operators on a local level, and different market drivers.
Interesting. Have any of those Kmart's gone full cycle to the refi?
Not yet. We're still stabilization. Again, my partners have 4 self-storage facilities that they did as individual projects, and then we did a joint venture Kmart, which is still leasing up. It's doing well. It's cash flow positive, but we have not gone full cycle. But also, like, if you look at the interest rate right now versus where we're likely to be a year or two from now, first of all, we're not there. We're only a couple years in, and we're scheduled at or before 5 years is the refi. Now's not the right time to be doing that anyway. And we do have a couple projects that we've got one project that we got multiple offers on right now. We have a few of them that we are going to sell because everybody wants to see you go full cycle. But ultimately, we are transitioning to what we call legacy projects where, again, we know there's going to be projects that we hold, that we sell, but our long-term vision is what creates real estate nomads and the
A new
ability to go
kind of
where you
cycle.
want. Yeah,
New kind of
exactly.
cycle. Interesting.
New cycle, that's right.
So on those, just generally speaking, I know every deal is going to be a little different. Not to be super focused on the conversions, but on the conversions, you've raised the capital. Say you bought the building for, I can't remember what you said, 1.5 million, somewhere
A
around there.
couple million, depending on the
1 to
size
2
of the
million.
property.
So you've raised that capital and you're holding it in cash while you stabilize it. Is that correct?
So sometimes we've closed buildings with cash. A lot of times we'll still use banks because banks are still giving us fairly decent rates for storage. There, a lot of times, we closed a building in Kernersville, North Carolina, 6 or 8 weeks ago, and the appraisal just came back and it appraised for 1.9 million more than we paid for it. Right.
Wow.
So typically we're buying these buildings significantly less than the replacement cost. The banks look at the building, and the buildings are worth a lot more. There's just nobody wants 100,000 square feet of space. So we're still able to get fixed rate debt. We've never used variable rate debt, never planned to use variable rate debt. So sometimes we'll close the building with cash. A lot of times we do still use debt, but then we raise capital from our investors to pay for the down payment. Right now, most debt is around 65% LTV. So we'll raise 35% of cost of the building plus construction plus some interest reserves. But sometimes we'll just use our fund to close it in cash. Sometimes we'll use the banks. It just depends on the situation. But yeah, we raise that money from our group of active investors, and then they earn a preferred return, cash flow, and then larger cash events throughout the life cycle of the deal.
It's awesome. Well, I could sit here and talk about this for days and days, but I'm watching some of the content on Nomad Capital as you're speaking, some of those previous projects. So it's very, very interesting. I love it. I love everything that you about. I love the path. I love this new cycle that you're talking about. That exit being a legacy perspective as opposed to an exit cash out and run. I do love that. If you could go back, Clint, say 15 years and 10, 15 years, and you were sat beside somebody who had the same passions, goals, values as you, what would you tell them?
That's a great question. I think that it's really easy for me to get locked into a strategy and be like, this is the way, right? This is, with short-term rentals or, whatever it may, come up with a strategy, multifamily. I'm like, this is the way. And I think the number one thing that I would say, and especially that I've learned, is that don't focus so much on an individual deal. Focus on the underlying principles as to what makes it work and different ways to add value, and understand that your job, and again, I don't mean to pigeonhole myself. I'm speaking just as a real estate investor. Your job is not to know what your strategy is going to be and go after it wholeheartedly. Your job is to listen to the market. And your job is to look at the skill set that you have or the people that you can affiliate with that have better skill sets than you do, and know your strengths and weaknesses and listen to the market. Right now, the market is telling us that we have a strategic advantage. And when a lot of other people are slowing down right now, we're going full speed ahead because a high interest rate environment doesn't affect us the same way that it does for other people. So the number one thing I would say is as a younger man, I tend to fixate on what I was doing and thinking that it was the best thing. And a lot of times the answer was more that it was the best thing for me right now, um, versus just learning the concepts and not realizing that the same way it applies to a duplex, it applies to 750 units inside of an old Kmart in Danville, Virginia.
Mhm.
So a bigger picture. But outside of that, I also fell in the trap of, I was working in the white coat world surrounded by physicians, and I fell into the trap of distractions and looking at, doing my main job so that on the weekends or the evenings I could go focus on building up the real estate that I thought was one day going to get me out of that. And I should have done, especially younger, I should have done a better job of keeping the main thing. Um, and fixating on like spending time and energy on one or two small projects that I learned a lot from that, and it's made me a lot better. And it's gotten me to the point now that I have unlimited freedom with my family. But the reality was like, is one property really going to do that much for me? Or even is 10 doors going to do that much for me in terms of how I'm spending my days when I'm in my 40s? No, it's not. Right. And so thinking about things that understanding the concepts are the same, and then looking at economies of scale and focusing on things that are changing your life in a meaningful way in terms of the amount of time that you get to spend with the people that you love doing the things you want to do.
Interesting.
It's a rambling answer. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I like it. It's like one of those things, as I can, for the listeners, I can see you working through that in your mind, and I can appreciate, trying to bring as much value as possible as if you were sitting beside that person, because that person may be listening right now, and keeping focus on the one thing. Where you say keep the main thing, and keep, really the biggest piece I think is understanding what that end piece looks like for you. It's a little different for everybody, and work your way backwards from there. Last little tune here is on nomadcapital.us. Obviously, there's more information about you, your team, what you guys are up to. Can connect with you and learn a little bit more about the investing opportunities there as well too. What is there a minimum investment criteria for investors who wanted to work with Nomad Capital?
Yep. We have various different shares. It's a $50,000 minimum. We're 506B syndication, so we can accept both accredited and non-accredited investors. But we have Class A shares, B shares, and C shares. So it's $50,000 minimum. That goes up in $1,000 increments, and then we have $250,000 shares and then $1 million shares. So obviously the equity adjusts accordingly. We're obviously trying to incentivize people to come in with larger amounts because, number one, it makes it easier for us to raise capital. But number two, when we have less people involved in an individual deal, it makes it cheaper to handle the legal and to handle communication and things like that. So those are the minimums. The number one thing that I want to focus on is that, I talk to investors all the time, and I'm an extrovert and I love it. And I always learn from every call, and it makes me better, which is ultimately my goal. So I love that. But my job is not to sell our deals and what we're doing. My job is to have a conversation and educate on what we're doing. And if it fits in with your goals, that's great. And if it doesn't, that's fine too. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. But a lot of times I talk to people that don't know what their goals are. And that's okay too, because it just kind of implies a level of ambiguity, which is just a lack of education or knowledge. And a lot of times good conversation kind of fleshes that out. But ultimately it just comes down to, we talked about this before we jumped on this episode, that successful real estate investing has to have three things. It's time, it's experience, and money. And for your listeners, a lot of times they have the money, but they don't have time. And without time, it's hard to get that experience. So I think just having a conversation with anybody about finalizing and formalizing what your goals are, and then putting a timeline on that, and then looking at the resources that you do have, whether it's experience, time, or capital, and being able to put those to work. That, one thing that I've said to you, and I've said before, is when you invest into a passive investment strategy, you're basically buying days off. The idea is that when you buy enough days off, you don't have to go back to work. Or when you don't feel like getting up and going to work one day, your capital should be getting up and going to work for you and buying you more days off. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, that's the best way to contact me is just, you can go to our website, nomadcapital.us. and book a call, or you can email me directly, clint@nomadcapital.us. I'm happy to connect with anybody and talk about medical industry or self-storage or anything else real estate related.
All right. And here's to the news cycle. Talk about full cycle all the time. Here's to the news cycle, living life in the legacy and understanding that pulling your profit out as debt as opposed to cash out and turn and burn method. I absolutely love that. And I think that's a big takeaway from this. Clint, you're an awesome man. I absolutely loved our conversation. Thank you for your time. Maybe it's because we're both Carolina boys. Do I qualify as Carolina boy? I've been here for a little over a year now, right? And
You're in,
transplant.
man. Listen, we're sharing the same tropical storm. You're in.
Yeah,
You're a
awesome.
Carolina boy now.
Well, hey
Hey,
man,
thanks for that.
appreciate it. We'll stay
Thank
in
you.
touch. Thank you again. I hope the listeners found some value. You know what? I'll put it out here. You better have found some value in this. If not, play it back, search it up, search Clint Harris. I've been doing this stuff for years and years and years, and just listening this gives me goosebumps. So I know that you found value in this, but I want to thank you for your time and, more importantly, your intention. Your attention, because without attention, your time is worth nothing. And thank you for giving that to us today. And man, here's to the next deal. Here's to the next relationship. We'll catch you on the next one. This is a Real Estate Mogul MD.